Hello, dear colleagues. From the speeches of the previous speakers and the questions of the audience, I assume that most of you are more or less familiar with blockchain technology, more or less. But another question is, how many of you can describe themselves as confident users of blockchain? Or how many of you had an experience of interaction with some kind of blockchain system? Some hands? I guess quite a minority. And that's a problem. The problem is that after decades of the blockchain or DLT idea existence, still we are at the dawn of massive use of blockchain due to the complexity of IT architecture of blockchain systems and some open practical challenges. So in my speech, I would like to devote equal time both to promises of the technology in the context of legal records and also the open challenges that we still face and would have to resolve, they would have to be resolved by us, lawyers and IT developers mutually. So the idea is simple. DLT and blockchain, as promised, is perhaps a perfect technology for legal records, as the key features of the technology, unlike traditional databases, are immutability to data falsification, records automatization, meaning that the system is designed to track all the records of the transactions happened within, and the synchronized distribution, meaning that all the changes with the data, all the changes in the system and transactions should be synchronized across the network and visible for every party. So once again, it is possible due to two technological features. First is the distributed network, and not only one copy of database is replicated to each server of this network, but every server forms the whole network while all the data is always synchronized. And second is an encryption of the data. So if we will look at the world use cases, the current industry drivers, we'll see that the technology promises, we will see the significance within the context of the jurisprudence and the promise of an efficient tool for legal records. In the world, the most driving industries and use cases are the supply chains, the governmental sector, including the financial transactions, taxations, use cases such as procurements and biddings, and all of them gives us a glimpse that the technology could perfectly fit the systems whereby all the transactions should be stored efficiently and immutable to data falsification. However, there are still open challenges for the use of technologies when we talk about a multi-party system. So let's take service convention as an example. The hypothesis is that let's imagine an interstate multi-party blockchain for transmitting and storing judicial documents, whereby each government or each party of blockchain has its own service and it all constructs a whole network where this data can be transmitted. So the system has its own promises and benefits. For example, we can automize the records of each fact on each state, starting from the initiation of the judicial document and closing with certificating the fact of delivery. All the facts would be synchronized and visible for all the parties. And perhaps, as a hypothesis, that tool also can be used for defendants or applicants to detect the fault on the part of the requesting or requested state and prove the absence of the defendant's fault in accepting the document and so on. However, Let's imagine how this system could have been built. First of all, the first issue could be the scope of application. We should know that blockchain deals only with transactional information, and only that information that is formed out of the transactions within the system. So the maximum of the processes that could have been done in digital environment should be realized in this blockchain system. In this case, we will not be able to deal with the substance of the documents, so most probably in the nearest future there won't be a way to validate facts within the document or to validate the compliance with some modal forms, for example. There might be some future for artificial intelligence in these terms, but still, the blockchain will deal only with transactions happened within the system. The second issue, the problem of the data access. We will deal with some confidential information in most of the cases, in service convention as well. So the problem is that there would be a certain access rights list, the information on the identification of all the users that will have an authority to deal with a certain document, to transmit it, to review it, and so on. So that leads us to the idea that DLT in this case, and in most of the cases, would need to be administered by each party in a certain in its own database jurisdictions, I would say, meaning that the question of granting a certain access rights should be administered by each state of the and by each party of this blockchain. That would lead us to the second problematic issue, how this interstate blockchain, multi-party blockchain would work, given that most of the states would have their own regulation on the data security, and most probably would insist on the closed, secure circuit for the governmental transactions, for the governmental information. So, and the current trend, happily, is that blockchain is developing towards a so-called cluster blockchain, when some part of the set of information within the whole network is visible only to a certain part. That still gives a technical opportunity not to falsificate information, but still. The cluster blockchain perhaps might be the future for such kind of interstate systems. However, we can see now how complex that infrastructure would be, given that each state would have to have its own closed circuit without an access of a certain information to another party. It would need to mark a certain information as visible to other parties and some of the information not visible. It would have to administer the access rights list, and how this complex IT architecture would be realized, that's the open question for most of the multi-party blockchains when we deal with the transmission and storage of legally significant data. Another issue would be to include all the alternative channels. We see that if blockchain is not utilized towards other ways of communication, the value of such blockchain system in the context of service convention would be always at question. So that leads to the overall global problem whether this other ways of communication could be properly digitized first, and then whether they would interconnect with the blockchain system, or all the communication would be depart within the blockchain system. So, and the last and the main issue is whether we can actually properly record the facts connected with the delivery. For example, as in Article 6, we would have to need a proof and efficient delivery, the time, the place, the methods, and the identity of the addressee. So that perhaps would be the most challenging part for any kind of blockchain system, whether blockchain would be actually useful tool to validate a certain, validate the facts of the physical world. So physical personal delivery would challenge the whole blockchain system, first of all. Perhaps we can transform all the communication into the digital transmission, the digital delivery of the documents. But that again will require a permanent intermediary of such as a state that owns the standard database for the legitimate contact information for the identities of the addressees. So another challenge would be to construct such system, given that these channels and the methods of the delivery would be regulated by a national law. The positive trend in this regard is that some of the ways of communication are technically and legally institutionalized in a certain countries. For example, an obligatory mobile registration and allows us to use mobile phones as a tool of authentication. And therefore, perhaps the mobile phones could be used to actually prove the fact of an efficient delivery. The same could work in terms of emails, if we would have a standard database for the legitimate emails for all the addressees. So generally, that issue gives a general question towards the technology application in all the industries, how to fixate and record the facts of the material world. In most of the industries, when we talk, for example, about the logistics, there is a positive trend of applying Internet of Things technologies towards tracking a certain facts, whether they happened or not, and storing them within the blockchain system. But in case of document transmission and serving the documents, we would still have a huge question whether we would, as a state, be able to construct such interconnected system that would also will have a certain function of the delivery statuses. We can imagine in the future that most of the communication tools would have such function as, for example, simply WhatsApp, whereby we can see the delivery statuses by the fact of the opening a certain application and so on. If all the channels would, all the digital channels at the end of the day would help us to implement this function, perhaps the problem will be solved. But still, we have the final issue of whether the states would be able not only to agree on such complicated system, but also to recognize the legal effect of this information. So that is, lastly, the final open question. However, to conclude, of course, the blockchain technology now is at the stage where there's a lot of justified skepticism towards its application. It's first of all the problem of the very complicated implementation, given that the data architecture would have to be constructed of several information systems, of several closed circuits, whereby governments can operate within their own circuits. The general problem of costs of such a system and the problem of the network performance and the functionality of this system. So these are, in the blockchain world, these are still the justified reasons deterring us from using the blockchain technology now. But still, there are some promises, and mainly in terms of legal records and the transmission of data. We can see that there is some future not only for the technical development of the tracking of all the events within the communication, but also if that problem could have been solved, we can see that there might be a hypothetical effect on the jurisprudence in general. Maybe in the future we will see that blockchain-based databases will give some way for prejudicial significance of the information stored within the blockchain, meaning that all the transactions, all the facts recorded within the blockchain system, perhaps in future might be used in the courts in a way that they will not be needed to be proved and will be automatically recognized by the judicial authorities. So the blockchain has its own open questions, but the positive trend in the business industry and the positive trend of the blockchain institutionalization across the world give us some kind of glimpse how this technology could change the way we store the information, the way we communicate with each other, the way we transmit the information, because that will require definitely a huge kind of political will of the states and the companies to create such system and to trust each other to operate within the common system. That concludes my speech. Thank you very much.